This is Pro Football Now. We are so glad to have you with us for Week 14 of the NFL season. I'm Amy Campbell. Joining me as always, senior writer for the MMQB, Albert Breer, is here to break down all the latest, wildest happenings in the league as we empty the notebook. And Albert, we're talking about wild, so we'll start with that Steelers-Bengals game. A great come-from-behind win for the Steelers, but what everybody's talking about is those vicious injuries. We saw Juju SmithSchuster gets a one-game suspension, as does George Iloka. This is becoming a very far-reaching problem. How much responsibility do you think is on the league versus the players to now start policing themselves? Because that was some crazy stuff we saw.
Well, I mean, I think the league is doing what they can do now. I mean, there's nothing harsher than suspending guys, right? And so we see Smith-Schuster, we see Iloka and Gronkowski in the New England game. All those guys are now suspended for Week 14. So I think that's what the league can do, is take those guys off the field. That's the best example you can set, and you're taking money out of their pocket and you're making an example of them. And I think on Monday night we had a little bit of a perfect storm too. I mean, these two teams have so much bad history. I mean, and everybody remembers what happened in the playoff game a couple of years ago, but this has been a constant. Like, this has been between these two teams. Like, the Steelers and Ravens would probably consider themselves bigger rivals, but Steelers-Bengals is nastier. And so you had that. You had playoff stakes, and you had a primetime audience, which highlights all of this stuff. And so I think a lot of people came out of that game thinking this is a pretty bad look for the league, especially because the Iloka and the Smith-Schuster hits happened in the same game where Ryan Shazier happens to go down the way he did, putting a huge spotlight on player safety. So there's definitely things that they've got to address there. And I think the number one thing from a football standpoint is something that needs to be addressed at the grassroots level, which is how the game is being taught. But the way I look at this particular situation, it was just a lot of factors coming together and creating this environment. And then you have the spotlight on top of that of primetime football, the only football game on, so everybody's watching. And, I think it really, gives everybody an idea of just how violent the game they're watching on a week-to-week basis is, and puts the onus again on the league to do something about it.
Well, in watching that hit Juju SmithSchuster, one of the youngest guys in the league, I imagine he looks up to Antonio Brown as a leader in the locker room who, as Juju's trying to apologize after the game, is saying this is karma. What kind of example do you think the older players need to set for younger guys like this?
Well, I mean, I think, you saw it with Smith-Schuster the way he stood over him, too. I mean, he stands over perfect, and though he was taunting him after it happened. And so his initial thought process was, I just lit this guy up, and I'm going to go wave it on him, And so that was sort of, I think that's a mentality thing that you have to find a way to get that out of the game. And I think this goes all the way back to, when we were kids, and they used to have the NFL literally was marketing videos with highlights of guys taking each other's heads off. You had, Jacked Up on ESPN, and I think this is sort of has to be a process of moving away from that culture where, these big, huge hits that get everyone's attention are kind of like the cool thing. I don't know if there's a better way to put that.
That machismo.
But just kind of like it plays into what football is. And, you have to move from that, which is Smith-Schuster standing over perfect, somehow to we all need to take care of each other out there because we're all in the same boat out here. This is very violent. We're all big, strong, fast guys. These collisions are dangerous, and we need to find a way to take care of each other so we can all do what we can to make sure that all of us stay out here for as long as we possibly can. But that certainly all runs counter to what the culture of the game has been forever.
So with the Gronk hit then, really quickly, very different look than the ones we saw on Monday Night Football.
It was.
These guys get one game. So what is that?
Yeah, I thought I thought the Gronk hit was worse.
Yeah.
Personally, and if you watch it, the league didn't have a choice but to suspend him.
Right.
Because the other hits were within the context of football play. This was different because if you watched it, and it's interesting. I do TV every weekend with Troy Brown and Charlie Weiss, and Troy was sitting there, and he actually thought that Gronk got blocked into the guy, because Gronk literally stopped, launched himself. And so it looked in real time, if you were looking at it from a certain angle, like maybe he got blocked into Tre'Davious White. Well, no, he stopped, thought about it, and then just what the hell with it? I'm going to go ahead and do it anyway. And he went ahead and did it. So there was a level of premeditation there. He even admitted that after the game, that the frustration had started to get to him. And to make it worse, White goes right into the concussion protocol, which is another hot button issue for the league. And so this one to me was a little more serious than the other two because it happened outside the context of actual play.
Yeah, a lot of emotions around all of those things this week. Let's shift gears a little bit to the New York Football Giants. We saw they cleaned house. Ben McAdoo, Jerry Reese have been relieved of duties. We knew this was going to happen a few weeks ago, so I'm interested in your opinion on the timing of this. How much of it do you think is a reaction to what a mess the benching of Eli and how that was handled by McAdoo and Reese?
All of it.
Okay, there you go.
A lot of it. I mean, look, I'm not saying that's why he was fired. I'm not saying that's why Reese was fired. That was coming one way or the other at the end of the year. I think the timing had everything to do with the way that the team was perceived over the course of the last 7 or 8 days in the New York market. You know, look, that brand, like what the Giants have stood for over the years, we know how much that means to the Mara family, how much that means to the Tisch family. And I was told that John Mara was furious over the way the organization's good name was being dragged through the mud over the course of last week. Now, he's culpable for part of that, of course, but this was something that, you know, I think clearly they didn't want to have to go through over the course of the next 4 weeks and have that hanging over the team. And I mean, to put it bluntly, they were being treated like the Jets. You know, like that's kind of the way that it felt like they were perceived. They started to be perceived around here. And so the only way to fix that, and look, we all saw what Jay Glazer reported on Sunday, that there were a group of players talking about bringing Eli Manning jerseys to a game. There was the rumors out there about the protest with the fans, like where the fans were going to go and tailgate in the parking lot and then not go into the stadium. I think all of that kind of accumulated, and you know what that was going to do to the organization's brand over the last month of the season and what they would have to live with in the off season. And ownership looked at it and said, you know what, it's not worth it. It's not worth it to just because we've never done this, just because we typically don't do this sort of thing, we wouldn't pull the plug on a coach. It's not worth it to put our franchise's reputation through another month of this. And so now they can turn the page and move on and put this in their past.
All right, this is an organization that is known for standing behind their coaches and not making knee-jerk decisions about those jobs. Who do you think is going to be the replacement for McAdoo? We
don't know until we know who the general manager is. And on another level, we don't know until we know what the structure is going to be. Now, John Mara did say at his press conference yesterday that in all likelihood, they're going to keep the current structure. The structure there has always been the head coach works for the general manager. It'll be interesting to see how that evolves over the course of this search, because in today's day and age, a lot of coaches require control. Now, the Giants have been able to get around that in the past. Look, they hired a young Bill Parcells, and he didn't wind up clashing with George Young till the end. Tom Coughlin revered the organization so much that he was willing to come in and not have the control that he had in Jacksonville. And so they've gotten around that in the past. And that's such a Cadillac job that maybe they can get around it again. It's going to be interesting to see how that plays into what candidates they're able to look at. Because if you look at guys who've been in demand the last few years, Adam Gase in Miami, Dan Quinn in Atlanta, those sorts of guys have gotten control of the 53-man roster. Chip Kelly in Philadelphia when he went there in 2013. And there's this new model that's kind of emerged where the head coach and the general manager are on an even plane. And it's the general manager's job to build the roster up. He's got control of free agency, the draft, and the 90-man roster. And then the head coach has control of cutting the roster down. He's got control of the 53. And so it'll be interesting to see how this evolves over the next few weeks as they start their general manager search and examine who might be the next head coach. But I think a big part of all of that is going to be how the organization is structured. And so we can throw the names out there, David Shaw, Josh McDaniels. You'll hear a lot of the usual suspects, Nick Saban maybe. What I think who they're able to get could boil down to maybe more than just who the general manager is. It could, in part, come down to what their structure is going to be.
That's going to be a fun one to watch. Speaking of fun, let's talk about the NFC. loaded,
Yeah.
absolutely loaded.
Yeah.
A very, very tight and fun playoff race going on. We've got some big games on tap for this weekend. The Saints and Falcons, Vikings, Panthers, Eagles, Rams. We are going to learn a lot. It's going to be a lot of fun. Who are you most excited about in the NFC when you look at this loaded?
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at the standings here now. You know, I think the Vikings are very interesting because, and look, I've talked to their players about this. It's rare that an offense can operate the way that the Vikings offense has operated over the last 2 months, where who the quarterback's going to be is a week-to-week proposition, but they've been able to do that. That's given the coaches great flexibility. And hey, you know, maybe we'll go to Teddy Bridgewater eventually. I think the Eagles, you know, obviously have played well end-to-end, probably the best team on balance through the year. The team that's most interesting, and I think the Rams, look, I think the Rams have a bright future. The team that's most interesting to me is the Saints, because this team is structured differently around Drew Brees than it has been at any point in his career. They have one of the NFL's best running games behind Alvin Kamara and Mark Ingram and that big offensive line. They have maybe the best defense that Drew Brees has played with. They're relying on a lot of rookies, which means they should continually get better. I mean, their rookie class, Alvin Kamara, Ryan Ramczyk, Marcus Williams, and Marshawn Lattimore.
Ooh.
And, you know, you look at it and you say, Drew Brees doesn't have to throw for 200 yards anymore to win games. And this is a guy who's been relied on year after year after year to throw for 5,000 yards, right? And now he can go in there and play okay, and they can win the game. And he hasn't had that dynamic in the past. And so you add all of that, the fact that this is maybe the most well-rounded team Drew Brees has played on, including the Super Bowl champion. And you look at the potential scenario where maybe they could win home field. If they can win home field and the road to the Super Bowl goes through the Superdome, and you look at that team and the way it's built and how it's built for Drew Brees, they're going to be tough to stop.
Oh, and built for a long season as well. It's been a lot of fun to watch them this year. Albert, always a pleasure to talk some football with you. Thanks so much.
I'm Steve Palazzolo.
And I'm Sam Monson. We are Pro Football Focus, and this is Well Actually.
Sam, in 2015, Cam Newton took the Carolina Panthers to the Super Bowl on the back of his MVP season. But even though the Panthers are winning again this year, well, actually, they can't make the same kind of Super Bowl run unless Newton dramatically improves his play.
Yeah, this is the lowest graded season of Cam Newton's career. And look, he is a flawed quarterback. It doesn't mean that he can't be a great quarterback, and we've seen that in the past in 2015 with that phenomenal season for the Panthers that brought them to the Super Bowl. But I like to say that he's just calibrated a yard too high.
I like it.
He's always going to airmail certain passes a yard over the heads of his receivers. And the Panthers' plan A to deal with that was to just surround him with a stable of 6'5" receivers and bail him out that way. And that didn't really work, because the problem with 6'5" receivers is those guys don't get open very often. Plan B has been to try and increase the number of easy, high percentage short passes that he gets, drafting guys like Christian McCaffrey, Curtis Samuel, and try and increase his production that way. But the problem is, it just isn't who Cam Newton is. It's not playing to his strengths. I think that they need to play to what he does well. During that 2015 season, his average depth of target was the second highest in the league, up at 11.3 yards per attempt downfield. This season it's down at just 8.7, which is only 18th in the league. They need to just unleash Cam Newton, let him go deep down the field where he is at his best.
Yeah, I understand trying to get easier throws for Cam, but it really just isn't his game. We went back last year, we charted every single pass for ball location in the NFL last year. He was dead last in accuracy on short passes, so it just doesn't match up with his skill set. And even this year, he's only 27th in adjusted completion percentage, despite shaving almost 3 yards off that average depth of target. So it's just not playing to his strengths. And what the short passing game has done has really taken away from the downfield passing game where Cam does excel. He's only 27th this year in big-time throw percentage. That's PFF's highest graded throws, those throws that lead to big, explosive plays. Last year, he was 12th in big-time throws. In that MVP season, he ranked 3rd. So the short pass game taking a little bit of that aggressiveness and the big play nature out of Cam's game.
Yeah, it hasn't fixed the problem that it was designed to fix, and it's taken away his single biggest strength. But I think there's also room to use him more in the running game as a designed part of that rushing attack. In that 2015 season, again, the great MVP year, he carried the ball 93 times as a designed runner. Another 22 times in the postseason that year. This year, he's carried the ball just 59 times in those design situations. That's on track for less than 80 total carries in that situation. So a noticeable downtick on that great season. And I think you should ramp that up. This is what Cam Newton does. This is what makes him such a unique and special quarterback. It's that ability to be a dangerous factor in the running game, and you need to turn him loose and let him do that stuff.
So they've clearly tried to protect Cam a lot these last couple of years, taking him out of the designed running game, throw a lot more short passes, getting rid of the ball a lot quicker. But I think if you're going to maximize this Panthers offense, you do have to unleash him. A few more designed runs per game and letting him drive the ball down the field. The worst part about all this is even with the short passes, he's not doing a great job of taking care of the ball. He still only ranks 26th out of 37 qualifiers in turnover-worthy plays. So he's still making some bad decisions, missing some throws. And if he's going to do that, you might as well have the opportunity for a big play. So I think it's time to unleash Cam as a runner and as a downfield thrower, and that's the way the Panthers can get this offense on track for a playoff run.
It's time now for Scott's Spotlight. Each week, we have the pleasure of getting the insight of one of football's greatest minds. Former NFL executive and general manager Scott McCloughan is joining us now. Scott, we got to see a full game of Jimmy Garoppolo as a 49er. He completed 70% of his passes for 293 yards. How would you evaluate Jimmy G's first game with San Fran?
You know what? I thought he did a really nice job. You know, it's a third career start. You know, he had 2 in New England, and then, of course, you know, he played a little bit last week, but this is his first start with San Fran. He, you know, I know he didn't score a touchdown, you know, and everybody wants to see points on the board. Fantasy people want to see points on the board. But he did a really nice job, and it wasn't just from the standpoint of the first 3.5 quarters, what he was able to do at the end of the game. And that proves character, that proves moxie, that proves somebody that understands what the game's about, you know, and he's very lucky to be in the organization with New England when he was there, being around Tom Brady, seeing it happen time and time again. And he proved his pelts, and that's what he is. And I see it going forward, he's not going to change. You know, it's going to be very unique because, you know, he's on last year of his deal, and they're going to have to do something. And there's a lot of teams out there that are going to want quarterbacks. You know, but I was very impressed. He won. You know, I understand it was 5 field goals, but it doesn't matter. He still got him a situation to score points, and that's what your quarterback has to do.
All right, Scott, so let's address that elephant in the room. His contract is up after this year. We've now seen 1 start in San Francisco. We had the 2 starts in New England. The Niners have had him in their building for the last month and a half. Have you seen enough of Jimmy Garoppolo now where if you're John Lynch, you feel comfortable paying him big money over a long-term deal?
Well, the thing about it is when you make that trade, knowing you're going to put a second-round pick that's going to be a high second-round pick, you're investing already because you're saying, you know what, because you can't lose that pick. You know what I'm saying? If you don't have a commodity that comes with it, then all you're doing is wasting an early second-round pick. I think because I know him personally from the standpoint of interviewing him and talking to him and being around him at, you know, on the school call, the combine and all that stuff. He's a quality guy. He's not going to embarrass the organization. Yeah. And they need to, because you know what? All he's going to do is get better, and it's not an easy system to learn. You know, I understand in New England, their offense is excellent, and they win a lot of games. But I know if Kyle's anything like Mike Shanahan, that's a tough system. But he's an intelligent guy. He's a good person. He has talent, you know, and he came in, you know, 2 weeks ago on the last series and threw a touchdown, and comes out this week and wins the game, you know. So if you're going to invest an early second, you got to invest for the future, and that's him.
All right, so speaking of exactly that, Scott, we're going to play a little game, short term, long term. Several quarterbacks are approaching free agency, so we're going to see if you would give them a short-term deal or a long-term deal. So we'll start with a guy you're very familiar with, Kirk Cousins. Should he get a short-term or a long-term deal?
Long-term, no doubt about it. Not even a question. Long-term. Again, quality person, quality football player, team guy, all about the organization. And has talent. I mean, he's proven it, you know, and he fits the offense to a T, and Jay loves that. And that's how he makes his play calls now. You know, same with Sean McVay did the last 2 years. They know him, he knows them, and it's a perfect fit.
Okay, Scott, the next one's tricky because this guy's about to turn 39 years old. He's scheduled to hit free agency. His team can't franchise him. That's Drew Brees, short-term or long-term?
You know what? I would do midterm, if that makes sense. I would do, no matter what, a 2-year deal. But I'd sit down and talk with him first and see where he's at, you know, family-wise, football-wise, physically, how he feels. I don't like one-year deals for somebody's a first ballot Hall of Famer because he's still playing well. I would do at least a two, and pay him good money because he's earned it.
Scott, another one that's a little tricky is Tyrod Taylor, not your classic QB, not an elite guy, but certainly having a pretty good year in Buffalo. If you're the GM, what kind of deal do you give him here?
You know what? It's unique because he's one of those guys that you think's rising. He's had some good games. He's had some bad games. There's a reason why he was benched. But the durability would be a huge thing from my standpoint. I'd make sure we put our hands on him with our doctors and make sure we understand that he is not prone every year to be an injured guy. I like his talent, but it'd be risky to do anything long-term, in my opinion. Unless you really know him as a person, you know his medical is going to be okay. But he's a good football player. But it's one of those things. It's tough. Each organization has their own mindset and how they want to approach it. But he has talent, and he's proven he can win games in the NFL as a starter, and that's important. But also there's some downfalls to it too.
Okay, so to wrap this up, then Scott, we're going to give you an entire quarterback room. The Vikings quarterback room: Case Keenum, Teddy Bridgewater, Sam Bradford. Short-term, long-term, what do you do with each of those guys?
The thing about it, if Case keeps playing the way he's playing, you have to address it. You have to address it and understand, Teddy's a young guy. They invested a lot in him with the draft pick. They really like him. I know the players like him. I know the staff likes him. The front office likes him. But still, you can't mess around with success. And they're having success. And the one thing about it is, too, going forward, is you can keep him. Because, Teddy's still under contract, but you can trade him, and that might end up being what it is. But with what Case has done is incredible. He's each week in and week out, he's making plays. He's getting the offense out there lined up, getting the play call, making plays down the field, scoring touchdowns. And that's what this game's about, so it's tough. But, Bridgewater, I'm pulling for him because I know the person he is, and I know he has talent, and I know he had a severe injury that really set him back. When Bradford, he came out rocking and rolling, this year, and then all of a sudden, boom, has the knee injury, that's going to be chronic, it sounds like, because that's why he couldn't practice, he couldn't play, and that's, you can't change that. You can do surgeries if you want and that kind of stuff, but it also plays into what you're going to pay him, because it's going to be a short-term deal because the longevity of the injury is short, and then it's not going to change. You can't fix it.
Okay, so let's take Case then in a vacuum. And we've seen late bloomer stories before at that position. Kurt Warner was one. He was 28 years old when he becomes a Rams starter, winds up having a Hall of Fame career. Rich Gannon's another one who became the league MVP, I believe in his late 30s there with the Raiders. Do you think Case Keenum has that sort of potential where there's a guy who was an afterthought for the early parts of his career, but maybe there's something there that we all didn't recognize that you could see going forward?
You know what? What you see is what you get, but that's fine, because the coordinator, the head coach, position coach, all the offensive minds working together, identify what he can and can't do. And that's why they're winning. And the Kurt Warner story is phenomenal. I understand that. Rich Gannon, phenomenal. But I don't think you rock the boat, because they're so hard to find. And who knows, if Teddy comes back, they're going to name him the starter, and the knee doesn't respond the way they think it will. All of a sudden, if Case walks, because Case is going to be an item, it's like Kirk Cousins. If you're winning or having success, not just this year with Kirk the last couple of years, but with Case this year, teams are intrigued. Now, it's a deep draft with quarterbacks, very deep, but still, those are rookies. You got a guy that's proven on NFL tape that he can win games, lead a division, and have a chance to playoffs and Super Bowl. And that's so hard to find. And to think that, okay, well, my ego is going to stand up and say, okay, well, we took Teddy, here, we traded up, boom, whatever. It's not right, because you can't rock the boat. And I promise you, if you went to the locker room, they all say, we love Teddy. We love him. He's a great person. We had a severe injury. He's fought his tail off to get back. But Case is our guy. Casey is the one going out there every Sunday, getting us a chance to win a football game.
Well, it's certainly been a lot of fun to watch Case Keenum this year, and several good quarterback options. Not a bad problem there for the Vikings to have. Scott, as always, we appreciate your time, your insight, second to none. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you guys very much.
Hey, thanks a lot, guys. Welcome to the Executive Suite. I'm Corey Parson, the Fantasy Executive. The fantasy football regular season is over. It's now time to head into the playoffs. And I got a couple tips that can help you in week number 14. If you are a Gronk owner and need a tight end help, Eagles tight end Trey Burton is a nice option. Zach Ertz could miss this week with a concussion. And the last time Ertz was out, Burton put up a nice fantasy game with a touchdown on 4 targets in week 9. In week 13, Burton was targeted 7 times after Ertz left the game and should be available on your waiver wire this week. Another tight end with upsides for your playoff run is Brown rookie tight end David Njoku. Over the past 2 weeks, Njoku has 8 catches on 10 targets with a touchdown. He is also playing in more than 50% of the Browns snaps on offense. Njoku was a first-round pick of the Browns in 2017 and is finally starting to find his way on an NFL field. The Jacksonville Jaguars defense has been one of the season's biggest storylines. Their vaunted secondary, dubbed the Jackson 5, has put imposing passing games on ice all season. This week, in the first round of the fantasy playoffs, the Seahawks head to Jacksonville. All of the Jags are tops in the NFL, and depending the passing game, there's no way you can sit Russell Wilson and Doug Baldwin this week. Your studs got you this far. Why would you go away from them now? Make sure you start both Seattle Seahawks players. Browns wide receiver Josh Gordon is back, but should he be in your fantasy lineup? I say yes. Gordon will be a fantasy asset down the stretch. In his first game back, he led the team in targets with 11 and looked like the Josh Gordon of old on several plays. In week 14, JG gets a Packers secondary that is dead last versus opposing wide receivers. He is a must-start going forward for those that need help at wide receiver. Our week 14 Symetra rising star is Tampa Bay Buccaneer running back Peyton Barber. In week 13, Barber touched the ball 27 times and played on almost 70% of the offensive snaps. In fantasy football, volume trumps efficiency. With the week 14 matchup versus the Lions' 20th ranked run defense, Barber is worth a pickup and play. With your PFN Fantasy Football update, I'm Corey Parson, the Fantasy Executive from the Executive Suite.
Thanks, Corey. I'm Albert Breer, and this is Last Call. And with the Giants' moves on Monday, the NFL's coaching carousel for 2018 is officially spinning. And this year, everyone is looking for their Sean McVay. I'll stop there and tell you there isn't a 30-year-old like that this time around, but there are some good young candidates to look at. So here's what we'll do. We're going to make the age limit 50, which means no Jim Harbaugh or Jim Schwartz and no Nick Saban. And with that cutoff in place, we're going to fire through a top 10 list. And I'm going to cop out at 10 and give you 2 names. Both guys are defensive coordinators. Carolina's Steve Wilks and Cincinnati's Paul Guenther. Each has shown an ability to handle colorful personalities, and both have interviewed for jobs in the past. At number 9, Patriots defensive coordinator Matt Patricia. Forget his Metallica tailgate look and the clown shirt. The guy has worked magic with a talent-poor New England front 7 and has a brilliant mind for football. At 8, it's time to start thinking about ex-Raiders coach Dennis Allen getting another shot. He's pumped life into a long, awful Saints defense, quickly incorporating a raft of young stars to do it. We'll give you a position coach next at 7, Philly's John DeFilippo. Flip's been a coordinator before and has been as important to Carson Wentz's development as any Eagle coach. At 6, give me Chiefs offensive coordinator Matt Nagy, a creative mind who had the NFL on its heels in September and October. Yes, KC has leveled off, but Nagy gave a glimpse of what he could do, and he can lead a room. Number 5 is Texans defensive coordinator Mike Vrabel. In his 14 seasons as a player, he grew a rep as a heady, dependable leader, and all of that has shown up in his 4 years as an NFL assistant. 4th, Northwestern coach Pat Fitzgerald. It'd take a lot for him to leave his alma mater, but if you want a guy who does more with less, then this is your guy. He could be an interesting candidate for Chicago. Number 3, Seahawks defensive coordinator Chris Richard. He's coached 8 NFL seasons, played 5 in the league, and his work now with Cam Chancellor and Richard Sherman shelved will be watched closely. At the 2nd spot, we've got another college coach, Stanford's David Shaw. He's built an incredibly resourceful program, and he's developed NFL talent. But what goes for Fitzgerald goes for him. It'll be tough to pry him from his alma mater. And finally, number 1, former Broncos coach Josh McDaniels. Over the last 7 years, we've seen all the things that made him the McVay of 2009. He's a brilliant tactician and developer of quarterbacks, and I think he's learned from his failures, like his boss once did.